I don't want to live a mediocre life with you anymore. When my wife inherited a fortune, she erased me. It was an instant divorce, swift and cold, and she honestly expected me to come crawling back and beg. The cruel irony? It took her losing everything, every single penny, for her to finally realize I never looked back. I ignored 300 calls over 5 long years. My name is Antonio, and this is the story of how my marriage crumbled into dust the second money walked through the door. It all began with a phone call, early one rainy Wednesday morning. I was in the kitchen, just finishing up breakfast. I heard Julia answer her mobile with that exaggerated theatricality she always reserved for important conversations. She hit the speaker button and her Aunt Rosa's voice, broken and thick with grief, filled the kitchen. It didn't take long to understand the news. Grandmother Carmela had passed away. What followed was the real shocker. Carmela had left absolutely everything, her entire inheritance, to Julia. The sum was enormous, enough to fundamentally change anyone's life. At first, I felt a confusing mix of sadness for Julia's loss and a deep relief. Carmela would have wanted her future secured. I walked over, placing my hand on her shoulder, thinking, we'll face this together, like we always do. But the moment she hung up, her face shifted, almost imperceptibly. There was no pain, no surprise, and certainly no gratitude. It was something else, something I couldn't place. "Do you believe it?" she finally murmured. The way she said it wasn't disbelief. It was pure, cold calculation. And in that single instant, a profoundly unsettling feeling hit me. It felt like something fundamental inside her was snapping into a new, awful place, as if she'd finally found a door she'd been waiting to open her whole life. I tried to keep my voice steady. "It's incredible, honey. She must have loved you so much to leave you all this." She just nodded vaguely. But the look she gave me was utterly foreign, unlike any she'd ever given me during our marriage. She didn't look at me as her partner anymore. She saw me as something else, something I couldn't define until much, much later. "You know what this means, right?" she said, moving to the window to watch the rain fall. "I don't have to worry about anything ever again. No more limits, no more budget, no more giving things up." Her words landed with the sickening force of a physical blow to the gut. We weren't wealthy, but we lived comfortably. My salary covered the bills, the mortgage, the groceries, the essentials, and some fun extras too. We had a nice, middle-class life. What sacrifices was she seeing that I wasn't? The days that followed blurred into a chaotic stream of calls, meetings with lawyers, and financial advisors. I kept trying to help her, offering to organize documents or review details, but she shot me down, flatly. "I can handle it alone," she insisted. "It's not that complicated." I backed off, accepting it was her inheritance, after all. But soon, the subtle, cutting comments began, revealing a devastating crack I hadn't seen forming. She started looking at our house with a new mix of disdain and annoyance. "These furniture pieces have always been too simple," she'd sneer as she walked past. Or she'd browse expensive listings on her mobile, murmuring, "Soon we can have better things." She seemed convinced that the life we shared had been a kind of modest, suffocating prison from which she was now gloriously freed. The real breaking point came 2 weeks later, during a simple dinner with a couple we'd been friends with for years. Naturally, the conversation drifted toward the inheritance, something that huge couldn't be kept quiet. "It must be a huge relief," our friend commented. "Financial security is always a blessing." Julia smiled, but there was a sharp, dangerous edge to it. "Yes, it makes you see things differently," she said. "People too." She delivered the line and looked directly, pointedly, at me. Our friend frowned, sensing the sudden, dense atmosphere at the table. "What do you mean?" Julia set her wine glass down with overly precise movements. "When you no longer depend on someone else's income, you start to see what things were necessary and what were just compromises." My stomach lurched. I clenched my jaw tight. "Compromises?" I asked, struggling to maintain my composure. She shrugged dismissively. "How many decisions in our life together were completely dictated by your salary? Where we lived, what we could afford to buy, what we did on weekends. Now, I can choose what I want without having to adapt to what you can afford." Our friends immediately looked away, deeply uncomfortable. I had to get up for the bathroom, not out of need, but just to breathe, to keep from exploding. When I returned, they had mercifully changed the subject, but the damage was done. Julia had, without any apology, reduced every single year of our marriage to a transaction, a system of economic inconvenience. The drive home was deadly silent. That night, lying in bed, I just stared at the ceiling, trying to process the humiliation I'd just heard. I remembered working late to afford a special gift for her. I remembered her saying she felt protected because I took care of our home. I remembered her pride in my promotions. Was all that just necessity? 3 weeks later, the inheritance money landed in her account. That very same day, she abruptly left the house, saying she needed a distraction. I expected some small practical purchase, but she returned with several huge bags from high-end stores I'd never seen her enter. Each clothing tag had a price that made me literally swallow hard. When she saw my expression, she snapped a defensive line. Don't look at me like that. I can afford this now, can't I? I'm not looking at you, I replied, my voice flat. I'm just surprised by this sudden shopping spree. She let out a laugh, but it wasn't her usual warm laugh. It was a sharp, almost mocking cackle. She explained she'd wanted those kinds of things for years but couldn't justify them before. When she said couldn't, she emphasized it, clearly pointing to my previous salary and our old limitations. That night, she tried on everything, spinning in front of the mirror with an enthusiasm she pretended to share with me, but which was clearly not for me at all. I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't showing off for my benefit. She was celebrating what she could now do without depending on me. What do you think? She asked, modeling a dress that easily cost more than my weekly wage. You look pretty, I told her truthfully. You always have. Her smile instantly died. That wasn't the answer she was looking for. She wanted me to surrender, to admit that my financial support was obsolete, that our entire dynamic had been obliterated. I understood the shift, but I had no idea how to fight back. Her transformation accelerated at a pace I couldn't have imagined. Within a month, Julia was a completely different person. She traded her old sensible sedan for a sporty convertible. The price tag was equivalent to many people's annual income. When I dared to ask about the insurance, she let out a scornful laugh. Insurance, Antonio? I don't have to think about those petty things anymore. Then came the house remodel. I returned from work one day to find strangers moving our furniture out, while Julia, a glass of wine in her hand, supervised everything with a new, authoritative air. She had hired interior designers, ordered custom furniture, and hung art on the walls that came with certificates of authenticity. Isn't it wonderful? She gushed, pointing to an abstract painting that looked like a tragic accident. What we had before, our memories, photos of our travels, books we chose together, furniture we picked as a couple, our shared life, was gone. Now, everything looked cold, staged, and lifted straight from a rich people magazine with no identity. But the truly agonizing part wasn't the material change, it was the way she started treating me. She began organizing elaborate dinners, inviting people we barely knew, people who only belonged to the right social circles. I would walk into my own home and find private chefs preparing buffets, waiters setting up crystal glasses, and my wife dressed as if for a gala. Oh, there you are, she'd say, the tone implying I was an unwelcome interruption in my own house. Don't you want to shower and change? Important people will be arriving soon. These important people were never our actual friends. They were hers, or rather, the connections she was trying to cultivate. During those gatherings, she introduced me with a mix of thinly veiled disdain and superiority. This is my husband. He works in what was it called? Something in systems management. As if my career were a trivial hobby, she couldn't quite recall. One night, a man in a bespoke suit asked me about my job. Before I could even open my mouth, Julia cut in smoothly. He is one of those stable, practical jobs, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Very functional. They smiled, nodded patronizingly, and went back to discussing her new art collection. I slipped away early, claiming I had an early morning. Julia barely looked up to say goodbye. It became routine. She would plan these gatherings without consulting me, then get irritated because I didn't enthusiastically jump into conversations about yacht clubs, exclusive wine tastings, and social circles that meant absolutely nothing to me. You're being antisocial, she reproached me one night. These people could be a good connection for us. Connections for what? I asked, completely exasperated. We have friends, and I have a job. She looked at me as if I were utterly clueless about life. Antonio, can't you see? This is our chance to move up, to surround ourselves with successful people. Not, she gestured vaguely toward the neighborhood our old friends lived in. To settle for the mediocre. I finally understood. The gulf between us was no longer just about money. It was something profound. Julia wasn't seeking a life with me. She was chasing a new identity where I was simply a mismatched accessory. And though I kept trying to convince myself that this phase would pass, a chilling certainty had already settled in. The woman I loved was vanishing behind a mask of hollow luxury, pretense, and resentment. I always sensed Julia viewed our shared life as lacking, but I never grasped the depth of her contempt until that Saturday morning in late November. I was in the kitchen, quietly savoring the simple routine of making coffee. Then I heard her firm, decisive footsteps. She walked in, fully dressed as if for a critical business meeting. I'm having lunch with some women from the country club, she announced, smoothing her hair while checking her reflection in her phone camera. She casually dropped a detail about securing strategic positions on charity boards, as if discussing high-level corporate mergers. I simply said, good. But inside, I wondered, since when do you even belong to a country club? They're people who can open doors, she clarified pointedly. Real doors? I asked. She paused, taking a slow, condescending measure of me. I was just wearing my comfortable jeans and a plain t-shirt, the coffee maker gently bubbling beside me. This isn't exactly the life where the most exciting thing on a Saturday morning is making a simple cup of coffee. I set my cup down gently on the counter. And what exactly is wrong with enjoying coffee quietly at home on a Saturday morning? She let out that long, dramatic sigh she always used when I was being an incomprehensible obstacle. Nothing, she replied. If you are willing to settle for small things, if you don't aspire to anything more. I remained silent for a moment, then lowered my voice. I thought you were happy with this. I thought so, too, she said, her voice turning cold. But that was before I discovered what true happiness is. She snatched her bag, gave her appearance a final check before turning to leave the kitchen, and then added, "Do you know what dawned on me yesterday? I've spent years making decisions based on what we could afford, where to travel, what car to buy, whether we could afford to eat out during the week. Always adjusting to a limit. But you just lived within your means. You gave up nothing." I did. And she walked out. I stayed slumped in that kitchen, or, more accurately, her kitchen, as it felt at that moment, trying to piece together how we had arrived here. I thought of the woman who used to surprise me with impromptu homemade dinners, the one who cherished our slow, planless Sunday mornings. Now, those cherished moments were, for her, concrete proof of a tiny, mediocre life. The inevitable arrived the following Tuesday. I walked in from work to find her sitting in the living room, a glass of wine in hand, and a heavy brown folder resting on the coffee table. "We need to talk," she announced. I knew, instantly, what was inside that folder. "I've been thinking about us," she continued, her tone more appropriate for a board meeting than a marital crisis. "And I think we are both seeking very different things now. Terribly different." I didn't sit down. I just stood there, waiting. She took a deep, theatrical breath and let it out. "I think we should get a divorce." The words didn't shock me, but the familiar punch still landed in my stomach. I simply replied, "I understand." My calm reaction seemed to actually throw her off balance. I think she expected a desperate plea, an argument, or some gesture of utter defeat. "I've already consulted a lawyer," she added, opening the folder and pushing official documents toward me. "I want everything to be clean, without any drama." Clean, I thought bitterly. As if there was any honorable way to tear apart a marriage simply because one person decided the other was no longer suitable for their upgraded life. I skimmed the papers. Dissolution, asset division. Everything was calculated and neatly squared. "I'll keep the house," she stated. "It's the most logical choice. And my inheritance from Carmela is separate property, so it won't be involved. But for the rest, you'll get your fair share." My fair share. How generous. I flipped to the final page. Her signature was already stamped there. Firm, secure, utterly decisive, as if the decision had been final for a very long time. "Do you have any doubts?" she asked. I had too many. When did I stop being enough? Did she ever really love me? Or was I just convenient stability? But I swallowed them all. I took the pen and signed every single sheet without arguing, without calling my own lawyer, without asking for a single moment to process. When I finished, I handed her the folder back, and her eyes widened in a small, fleeting look of surprise. "That's all?" she asked. "That's all," I replied. I walked to the entrance, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she called out from behind me. "To leave," I answered, without turning back. As I drove away, I saw her in the rearview mirror, standing at the door of our house, watching me go. Her expression was a confusing blend of confusion and raw frustration. Perhaps she genuinely expected tears, a desperate promise to become the high-roller man her new economic standard demanded. For years, I had quietly carried the feeling that, for certain people, I was just a temporary convenience, a momentary support they could discard the moment I stopped being useful. And when I no longer fit the mold they had constructed, I inevitably became another disposable disappointment. With Julia, that feeling had become a deep, daily ache, fueled by her calculated silences and impossible expectations. Now, it had simply reached its inevitable conclusion. I remember the exact sensation that swept through my chest as the door closed behind me. It was like shedding a gigantic weight that I'd been dragging for years without even realizing it. I didn't go home that night, or the next. Days passed before I set foot there again, and by then, I returned not as a husband, but as a detached visitor collecting the few possessions I had left. I checked into a discreet hotel downtown. Quiet corridors, service that asked no questions. Anonymity was exactly what I craved. No pitying looks, no uncomfortable explanations, no forced conversations. In that impersonal room, with the soft hum of the air conditioner, I finally sat down, letting the silence envelop me. For the first time in months, maybe years, my mind was clear enough to face the brutal truth without denial. I didn't call friends for advice or lawyers for battle. I didn't turn to family who would only beg me to talk to Julia and try again. Instead, I picked up the phone and dialed a corporate relocation company. It was the first, decisive step of a plan I'd been unknowingly postponing for years. "How quickly can you organize a relocation to another state?" I asked, my voice firmer than I remembered it being. The manager paused. "It depends on the position and the company, sir. Do you have a deadline?" 2 weeks, I answered immediately. Ambitious, he conceded, professional but surprised, but possible. Do you have a city in mind? Minneapolis, Denver, Phoenix. Any city would do, as long as it was thousands of miles away from the life I was now leaving behind. 3 days later, I had interviews scheduled. I didn't sleep well during those nights, but it wasn't from anguish. It was the sheer, buzzing energy that comes when you're about to make a monumental pivot. Less than a week later, I received a formal offer from Minneapolis. The position was great, a genuine promotion, with a 15% increase in salary. Best of all, the company agreed to cover all moving expenses. That sealed it. I didn't have to think twice. This was the exit I had been unknowingly waiting for. I went back to the house only once, on a Thursday afternoon. It was the precise time I knew Julia would be at her spa routine. That tiny, irrelevant detail confirmed how rigidly predictable our life had become. I walked in, feeling no haste, no fear of running into her. And crossing the threshold, I instantly confirmed I no longer belonged there. The air felt different. New, cold artwork hung on the walls. Furniture was shifted. Fresh flowers sat in vases I'd never seen. It was as if she had frantically tried to erase every trace of our shared history, replacing it with an aesthetic that matched the image she desperately wanted to project to the outside world. I packed only the absolute essentials, documents, a few changes of clothes, and my favorite books. I refused to take any of the objects we had bought together. I didn't want to carry memories that had been nothing but illusions disguised as stability. I left behind tools, appliances, furniture, even photographs, all remnants of a promise that had never been fulfilled. Our wedding pictures were still carefully arranged on the fireplace mantel. It was deeply strange to see them there, pristine, like artifacts from a life I never lived. The furniture was in its place, the kitchen impeccable, my toolbox untouched in the garage. Everything was the same, yet none of it was mine. I didn't leave a note. No message, no apology, no justification. I simply took off my wedding ring, placed it squarely on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker she used every morning, and walked out. I knew she would see it and understand my silence completely. The move to Minneapolis happened even faster than planned. The company was stunningly efficient. 2 weeks after I signed the divorce papers, I was standing in a bright, empty apartment more than 2,000 kilometers away from my old life, watching the moving truck disappear down the street. I closed the door, leaned my forehead against the wood, took a profound breath, and knew this was the real beginning. I threw myself into work with obsessive intensity. I memorized names, understood the company's inner workings, and identified the rhythms of every department. Each task contributed to a powerful sense of forward momentum. I joined a gym, found my new favorite coffee shop, and established new routines, never once looking back. I changed my phone number the day I arrived. I deleted my social media accounts and opened new ones with a light pseudonym. I wasn't trying to hide, but I wasn't going to let anyone drag me back to a life I had rejected. Francesco, the only college friend I had kept, managed to get my work number after relentless insistence with the company. When we finally spoke, his opening line was so bizarre it took me a moment to register. "Julia's throwing a party," he told me. "Seriously, this weekend. She's calling it the celebration of the new chapter." She had invited everyone, family, friends, acquaintances, all the people who had been part of our shared life. A party to celebrate my disappearance. "Are you okay?" Francesco asked, genuinely baffled. "Nobody understands what happened between you two." "I'm fine," I replied. Better than ever. And it was the absolute truth. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in ages. No interruptions, no looping anxious thoughts, no stress. Days later, I heard the details of the party. It was a senseless, vulgar display of excess, an over-the-top buffet, a professional DJ, an open bar. It was less a social event and more an aggressive competition of ostentation. But the most revealing detail was Julia's behavior throughout the evening. According to several attendees, she kept glancing nervously at the door every time someone entered. She constantly checked her phone, clearly expecting a call that never came. She made calculated, loud comments. Some people just don't know how to handle change. They'd rather disappear than face reality. She even hinted to people that I would show up at any moment, ready to beg her to reconsider, utterly convinced that I couldn't survive without her. Meanwhile, I was in Minneapolis, assembling my new furniture, mapping out hiking trails, and choosing plants for my living room. 2 states separated us, and our lives were 2 entirely different realities. The contact attempt started that Sunday. Julia called my old number endlessly. Francesco, still plugged into that old social circle, told me the initial messages were pure, venomous rage. They soon transformed into desperate questions. "Where are you?" was the first, almost a written scream. When she got nothing, she started looking for me in all the predictable places. My old gym, our coffee shop, even my workplace. That's where she learned I'd resigned days ago, and my desk was clean, without a single clue to my identity. During those first 2 weeks, Julia simply couldn't believe I was truly gone. She thought I was hiding at a friend's house or in a hotel, trying to inflict a few days of anxiety on her. She couldn't grasp that I hadn't just left. I had actively decided to disappear completely from every single thing we had shared. After 2 weeks of failed searches, she hired a private investigator. I later learned, by chance, that Salvatore's report concluded I had covered my tracks like a professional. New job, new address, different number, and routines completely foreign to the man she thought she knew. But that was all background noise for me. I was focused on building a new life from the foundation up, finally free of the shadow of my marriage. The first months were a profound, beautiful transition. I joined a hiking group and spent my weekends exploring rural trails. I took a basic cooking course out of necessity and surprised myself by making real meals. I rediscovered reading, something I had lost in the final years with Julia. I bought furniture that felt authentic to me, not just expensive. A comfortable armchair, a mattress that ensured deep sleep, a simple kitchen table where I could have breakfast watching the trees outside. The most crucial change? I stopped living in reaction to someone else. I stopped analyzing every gesture, every silence, every potential sign of her disapproval. I stopped wondering what she was thinking or planning. And, most importantly, I finally stopped caring if Julia missed my contributions or if she regretted anything. I found out later she had genuinely assumed I would return within a month. She apparently told people I was having a tantrum and would soon realize my mistake, that real life would hit me hard and I'd come back, full of regret. That's why she left the house untouched for 6 months, treating my absence like a child's fit. But I wasn't staging a protest or trying to teach her a lesson. It wasn't a demonstration. It was profound exhaustion. Exhaustion from always being the second choice. Exhaustion from being the functional alternative in a life she openly labeled as mediocre. Exhaustion from participating in a marriage that never, ever considered me enough. By the time my first winter in Minneapolis arrived, my life was entirely separate from my past. I had new friends who knew me simply as Antonio, not Julia's husband. I found joy in quiet Saturday mornings, not because I couldn't afford a trip, but because I chose the calm. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was building something real, something entirely mine. And that was enough. 3 years passed. My life was calm, settled, and organized when I received an unexpected call. It was Bianca, our old neighbor. We had never been close friends, but we were cordial. Hearing his voice immediately unnerved me. "I hope I'm not bothering you," he said after the awkward, formal greetings. "I got your work number from your old company directory. I wasn't sure I should call." "Tell me what's going on," I replied, suddenly alert. "It's about Julia," he added, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know if you still talk, or if you even care, but things have become incredibly complicated for her lately." I let the silence hang for a few seconds. A sliver of curiosity tugged at me, but the larger, conscious part, the one I had painstakingly built, didn't want the burden. "Complicated how?" I finally asked. He sighed heavily. "She lost the house last month. Foreclosure. I think she's living with her parents temporarily." That truly shocked me. The house had been fully paid off after the divorce. How do you lose a house with no mortgage? I murmured. "She took out a huge loan against the property about 18 months ago," he explained. "Then she couldn't make the payments." For the next 20 minutes, he laid out everything that had happened in the life I had walked away from. What he described was both shocking and totally predictable. Her expenses had exploded. Designer clothes became the rule, not the occasional splurge. She traded the BMW for a Mercedes, and then a Porsche. Multiple trips to Europe, jewelry worth more than most cars, and the house renovated twice in 2 years. She threw extravagant parties every few weeks, professional catering, decoration, music, anything to attract the right attention. She was desperate to be accepted into that exclusive social circle, but the cost was colossal. When Carmela's inheritance started to bleed dry, she took out the massive loan, hoping, Bianca said, to maintain her facade while she figured out her next move. But the payments were impossible, and she had no reliable income. The idea of her actually working was ludicrous for someone who had convinced herself she was above it. She tried to find an executive job 6 months ago, but she had been out of the market too long, and her expectations were delusional. When that failed, she tried a consultancy, but it never got off the ground. The brutal math was simple. Even the largest inheritance has a limit, and that limit is reached quickly when you spend as if it were infinite, with zero income to replenish it. The sale of the house didn't even cover what she owed from the loan, the credit cards, and the renovations. She walked away with nothing. Absolutely nothing. The same woman who had once dismissed our life as mediocre middle class was now starting over with less than we had the day we got married. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," Bianca admitted, "but she's been hounding me for days. She asks where you are, if anyone has your contact." I think the reality has finally crushed her. After that call, I stood in my Minneapolis kitchen for a long time, processing it all. The strangest thing? I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, no hatred, no pity. Just a vast, empty space. I had built a new life, miles away from her orbit. I'd been promoted twice, earning more than I ever imagined. I bought a small cabin an hour north where I spent weekends reading and hiking, enjoying the deep silence. The exact silence Julia used to call ordinary or mediocre. And most importantly, I was dating Elena, a woman who valued the simple life we shared and would never, ever try to change me or escape from our reality. The conversation with Bianca only brought one thing into sharp focus: the astonishing amount of energy I had wasted trying to be enough for a woman who never believed I was. 2 months later, Francesco called again. "Antonio," he said, "this is going to sound insane, but I think your ex-wife tried to find me on Facebook. She sent me a message asking if I knew how to find you. She said it was urgent." "And what did you do?" I asked. "Nothing." I ignored it, but her tone was desperate. She claims she made mistakes and wants to fix things. She also said she called your old number and it's disconnected. She's clearly been looking for you for a long time. I sat with that, thinking about the woman I married versus the woman who had shoved divorce papers in my face because I wasn't up to her financial standards. It no longer mattered which version was the real Julia. My choice was made the day I signed the papers and disappeared. I chose to rebuild myself, rather than fight for someone who had already decided I wasn't worth the effort. 6 months later, the stories became a flood. Friends and acquaintances called, saying Julia was contacting them, reaching out to people we barely knew, all desperate to find my location. "She sounds broken," one friend told me. "Not just about money, though that's a huge part of it. Emotionally, she's shattered, like she finally understands what she threw away." It was a curious description. Julia had spent almost 2 years frantically trying to maintain the lifestyle she believed she deserved. She burned through money, favors, and friendships at breakneck speed. The sophisticated friends abandoned her the moment she ceased to be useful. The group she boasted about simply moved on to someone with deeper pockets. She was left utterly alone, without security or support. She was learning that financial security and human connection are not the same thing. But that was her lesson to learn, not my responsibility to teach. I had learned mine. The greatest act of self-love is walking away from someone who doesn't value your contribution. I had internalized that truth so deeply that the news of her utter desperation didn't even trigger the impulse to save her from the consequences of her own choices. Some people spend their lives searching for themselves. I found myself the day I let go of the person who never wanted to know who I really was. 5 years after the divorce, my house was paid off. I was a senior manager. I was in a loving, stable relationship with Elena, a woman who loved quiet mornings as much as I did. One Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang in the office. "Antonio," a strange voice asked, "are you the one who used to live on that street name?" The man introduced himself as Salvatore, the private investigator. His tone was professional, completely straightforward. "Depends who's asking," I replied cautiously. "Your ex-wife hired me to locate you," he informed me. "She's been searching for you for a very long time. She also wants you to know something else," Salvatore added. "The phone company held the records of your old number even after it was disconnected. We found over 300 missed calls made to that phone over the past 5 years. 5 years. Calling a number she knew was dead. For 5 years, nearly 300 communications accumulated, all aimed at the number I abandoned the day I vanished from her life. That phone was a dead vestige, a definitively cut thread. Yet she had insisted, again and again. More than one call a week, always hitting a voicemail I never checked. It wasn't until Salvatore told me that I grasped the full, horrifying picture. "She wants to find you," he stated with the weary voice of someone who has seen too much tragedy. "She's willing to fly wherever you are." At first, I still suspected it was an exaggeration, a stunt to pressure me into an emotional reaction. But Salvatore wasn't that kind of operator. He was an intuition refined by years of dealing with broken, manipulative, or desperately regretful people chasing shadows. I pressed him for details. I needed to know why, after such absolute silence, she was moving now. "Julia can afford the flight," he explained, "but that's it. She is completely ruined financially." That fact stunned me. Knowing her, I struggled to imagine her facing real hardship. I asked him to be specific. After a brief pause, he delivered the truth without any sugarcoating. "She's in pieces, Antonio," he said. "Truly, she has absolutely nothing left. She's back living with her parents in the same bedroom she had at 17. She works impossible shifts at a massive retail store and can't even afford to pay my fees. Domenico, her cousin, is covering my expenses. He's the one who insisted I do a deeper investigation." It was devastating. A woman who had gone from lavish spending to depending on a relative's charity. They had lost everything, and she, accustomed to a life of flawless appearances, was now reduced to a point she thought impossible. And still, after 5 years of absolute distance, she wanted to talk to me. Salvatore continued, preparing to deliver the final, most delicate part. "She's convinced she needs to apologize. She says she made terrible mistakes, that she only now understands what was truly important, that she carries guilt that keeps her awake at night. She talks of deep remorse, of wanting to repair what she can. It's what everyone says, but honestly, it sounds authentic. She doesn't want money. She doesn't want you back." I listened, but my answer was already fixed. That chapter had slammed shut the day I walked out of that house. Any closure Julia needed was her burden, not mine to provide. I told Salvatore I'd think about it, but the decision was already made. That same evening, I called Salvatore back to confirm what we both knew. I had no interest in seeing her. I expected as much, he replied before hanging up. But I have to pass along her final message. She will be in Minneapolis this weekend anyway. She says she'll wait for you at that Graham Bin coffee shop you always went to. That detail sent a chill down my spine. How much does she know about my current life, exactly? I asked. There was a brief, telling pause. More than she should, he finally admitted. She knows your address, your work, the gym you go to. She's been tracking your movements for months. I only formalized the investigation when they hired me. She already had a lot of information on her own. Perfect. My ex-wife was meticulously observing my life from thousands of miles away. Every routine, every detail, without my having the slightest clue. Salvatore tried to reassure me. Antonio, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen people fake regret, lie with tears, and manipulate with confessions. But what she's expressing feels real. She doesn't want money. She doesn't want to get back together. She just wants to explain, ask for forgiveness, and, according to her, leave without bothering you if you don't show. That Friday afternoon, driving home from work, I passed the Graham Bin coffee shop. I had no intention of stopping, no desire for an encounter. It was just a strange, morbid curiosity to see what 5 years of freefall had done to the woman who had casually labeled me mediocre. There she was, Julia, sitting by the window. Her posture was small, defeated. I didn't recognize it. She was a ghost of the person she'd been. There was no trace of the confident, elegant woman with the perpetual critical air. Her clothes were simple, clean, but cheap, worlds away from the designer dresses that once crammed her closet. Her face was pale, profoundly tired, aged well before her time. Her hair, pulled back in a graceless ponytail, confirmed how much her life had imploded since the days when she obsessively curated her image. She kept checking her phone, then the door, a mix of desperate hope and anxiety etched onto her face. I watched her from the opposite sidewalk. 10 minutes that stretched impossibly long. Yes, a very tiny part of me felt a tug of pity. But the other part, the wounded core that had carried the betrayal, perfectly remembered the sensation of being treated like a nuisance by the person who had sworn her life to me. I didn't cross the street. I didn't go in. I turned around and drove straight home. Elena, my girlfriend, was cooking dinner when I walked in, greeting me with that quiet, uncomplicated normalcy I had never once experienced with Julia. In that moment, I knew I had nothing left for my ex-wife. Seeing her waiting for a conversation, I had no intention of having confirmed the painful truth. I had moved on, and she had simply fallen. The next morning, while savoring my coffee and the smooth start of the weekend, the doorbell rang. I walked to the door, my warm cup in hand. Peeking through the peephole, I instantly recognized her. Julia was standing right there, on my doorstep. Seeing her so close reinforced the impression from the day before. The weariness was deeper, the desperation more stark, the distance between who we had been and who we were now, immeasurable. The confident, haughty attitude that had fueled the divorce was completely gone. In its place, when I finally opened the door, I saw a woman exhausted, regretful, and clinging to a fragile desperation. I didn't invite her in. She stayed on the threshold, taking a shaky breath before speaking. "Hello," she whispered. "I know you didn't want to see me, but I felt I had to try one last time." I ignored her greeting, preferring to get straight to the point. "How did you get my address?" She dropped her gaze, shame washing over her. "Salvatore told me. I'm sorry to come like this, but I've been trying to find you for 5 years. 5 years thinking about what I did, about how I ruined everything." As she spoke, her eyes drifted inside the house, searching for clues to the life I had built without her. "Are you okay?" she asked, suddenly timid. "Are you happy?" I didn't confirm or deny anything. I just waited for her to say what she'd traveled 2,000 kilometers to say. "I know I owe you nothing," she continued, her voice beginning to crack. "I know I have no right to be here, but I needed to tell you I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I'm sorry for every single awful word. I threw away the best part of my life, and I was too blind to see it." I replied with a simple, quiet, "It's okay." My calm seemed to completely unbalance her. She had been bracing for a fight, a meltdown, a dramatic scene, but I was simply no longer there. "I've lost everything," she confessed, the facade cracking. "The money, the house, those fake friends who only showed up to take advantage. I work at a store, I'm living back with my parents, and every day I think about how things would be if I hadn't been so selfish." She paused, then added with a raw sincerity that felt alien to the Julia I knew. "I'm sorry you had to endure all of that. Truly, I'm sorry." I didn't know how to respond. She wasn't asking for anything, but I couldn't give her what no longer existed. "I love you," she blurted out suddenly, a desperate last plea. "I never stopped loving you. I got completely carried away by the money, by that insane lifestyle, by the delusion that I deserved something better when the best thing was right there in front of me. It was the practice declaration she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Her ultimate emotional gambit. I appreciate you telling me, I replied, keeping my voice low and even, but that doesn't change anything now. I watched her collapse, her shoulders slumping. Please, I know I don't deserve it, but we can try again. I am a different person now. I understand what really matters. I shook my head slowly. You've changed because life broke you. You changed because you lost the money and the status that made you feel superior. That's not the same as truly transforming. It's not fair, she whispered. You may have learned a lesson. I grant you that. But I grew too. And the man I am now has no space in his life for someone who treated me the way you did. Tears started to fall. Not exaggerated sobs, but quiet, heavy grief, the kind that comes when there is finally no escape left. I know I hurt you, she said, choking back tears. I know I made you feel small, that I made you believe you weren't enough, but you were. You were everything, and I threw it all away. You did, I nodded. And it wasn't a moment of weakness. It wasn't an accident. It was a cold decision you made because you were absolutely convinced your life had to be better without me. She raised her head, mascara streaked on her cheeks. So, there's nothing I can say? Nothing I can do? No, I replied softly. Our story is finished. I'm not angry anymore, but I am not available to relive something that died 5 years ago. Are you with someone? She asked, barely audible. Yes, I answered. With someone who values the life we share instead of seeing it as a stepping stone to something better. Just then, I heard the familiar sound of the garage door opening. Elena was home from her run. Julia tensed up, eyes wide. You have to go, I told her firmly, before Elena could walk around the corner. And you must not come back. What was between us is over. Accept that, and move on with your life. She nodded, the tears falling freely again. She finally understood this was the final, irreversible end. I hope someday you can forgive me, she murmured as she backed away. I already did, I replied. But forgiving doesn't mean going back. When she finally disappeared from view, Elena walked up the sidewalk, breathing heavily. Who was that? She asked. No one important, I answered honestly. And in that instant, I knew it was the absolute truth. The woman who once occupied the entire center of my world no longer held any space in it. I had built something real and solid. She, heartbreakingly, was still searching for someone to build a life for her, for a place to hide. Do you ever truly forgive the person who taught you the painful difference between being loved and being convenient? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments.